Good morning. This is Stephen Haylestrom. Program is Let's Talk Housing, and this is on 92.7 FM in Peterborough, brought to you by Trent Radio, community radio, at its best, I might say, and thanks to them again for hosting this program, putting it out there. As well, this program is available as a podcast. You can find it on basically all your podcast apps, and it's Let's Talk Housing with Stephen Haylestrom. And today we're going to continue with some excerpts from my visit to the Northumberland Housing Forum that was put on a couple of weeks ago now. Last week we had a great history lesson on the history of housing. Really pleased to have participated in this event and to be able to bring this out to the wider audience for the people who were not able to attend. The information was fantastic, and we can all learn something from it. And now we're going to hear from one of the other guests from the forum, Monica Turner, but I'm going to let her be introduced by the person, by the MC at the forum. And he will give you all the details, and then we'll hear from Monica. And also, I am going to try to include somehow or another the report that she talks about in here as a PDF. I know I can do it with the podcast, but if there's a way for me to include it somehow connected to the broadcast, I will do that. I'll check with the people at 92.7 and see if there's a way that I can do that. Okay, thank you, and here we go. One other thing that I really want to add in before we listen to Monica is, please, if you fast forward to 13 minutes beyond when her introduction starts, you'll hear her talk about one of the most important things is the statistic from Statistics Canada. The average housing cost between 2015 and 2020 increased by 60%. Average housing, cost for housing, ownership, rental, etc., all combined, according to Stats Canada, an increase between 2015 and 2020 of 60%, whereas gross incomes, meaning income before taxes, increased over the same period by only 6%. That means that housing costs increased 10 times more than income. So, in a nutshell, as Monica states, and is clear in that report, and you'll even hear me talking during this saying, wow, thank goodness somebody finally did this and found this and is doing this report, because for some reason our governments don't do this type of reporting. But thank you to Habitat and the United Way for sponsoring this. And there you go. That's it in a nutshell. 60% for housing cost increase, only 6% in income. So please listen. Monica has a lot to say, and again, I will try my best to include the report somehow or another for everybody to get. Thank you.
So I want to introduce to you now Monica Turner. Monica was the Director of Policy for the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, AMO, from 2010 to 2022. She joined AMO in 2010 after 25 years with the Ontario government as both a senior public servant and political assistant. And Monica worked in several provincial ministries, including the Ministry of Health twice. Monica now has her own public policy consulting and facilitation business, roving capacity in Cobourg. And her areas of expertise include public health, health, housing, municipal issues, emergency services, and board governance issues. And Monica's going to come and talk to you a little bit about some work that she's been doing in our community. Monica.
Thank you. Thanks, Neil. And I'm just going to check if Dawn's still going to do my slides. Cool. So thanks for coming out today. At least the weather is better than yesterday, but really appreciate you making the time. So what we're trying to do is give you lots of information about housing. And I started last January, doing a report for Habitat for Humanity Northumberland. It was funded by United Way, Northumberland, and for that I really appreciated it. But it was supposedly, and it is, and I'll give you the website, and it will be sent out to you if you sign up. It was a review of what does housing look like in Northumberland now. And by now, I say I did my work primarily from January to April. So all my counts are March, and I had to use some numbers from January, so I'll let you know where it did, because if you're looking at planning submissions, they can change from day to day. So I dated and timed every time I was counting every single unit that was going through. Next one, please. So project objectives. I did this report to fulfill one of Habitat for Humanity's strategic objectives for this year, and it was to look at a conceptual map, asset inventory of 5 primary permanent housing categories. So I looked at market housing, attainable housing, affordable housing, I'll define these all, deeply affordable housing, including community housing and supportive housing. I took a slice of the continuum. You know that it can go both ways. But looking at what are people living in now, I used census data, and I used all the materials from all the 7 lower tier municipalities and the county for what was going through the system at this point. So I was looking at what type of housing do residents live in right now, what's being proposed to be built in the next 5 years, and that was the fun part. Fun with figures was looking at every planning submission that was going through the process, how many units, where it was in the process, as well as everything that was being sold or constructed in this time period as well. I didn't get into resale because I would have lost my mind. I just couldn't. It changed every hour. But what I was looking at was new built, either on the market, just about to go on the market, or those in the planning system in the next 1 to 3 to 5 years. And it wasn't to answer a whole bunch of questions other than what's in the system right now, but it was basically written to provide a foundation about what does housing look like in Northumberland now, with facts and data and all that, because everybody can talk about it, but folks were looking for what does housing look like now with the data. So one thing I will say, I've looked around. This is the only study of this type in Ontario or North America that I could find. There were a few other ones, but it was kind of neat, and I really thank Habitat for engaging me to do this. So key findings.
It's phenomenal. There is no information like this. Been looking for it.
So I'm going to tell you something you all know anyways, but I can document it. People who need affordable, deeply affordable, and supportive housing in Northumberland can't find it. And I appreciate Patricia going before me, because she gave you the history of housing. How did we get here? But what I was able to say is that essentially all but market housing and estate housing, which I define as over 1 million, is in extremely short supply in Northumberland County. So we've got lots and lots of houses going up, and I'll talk more about it, but very few are affordable or deeply affordable. And one thing, and you know this from your kids, you know this from your parents, there's not enough affordable housing being built or in the planning stages to meet the workforce needs of Northumberland. We have people who are commuting in to Northumberland daily to work at our manufacturers, to build the houses, but there's no place for them to actually live. And we heard this from employers, from the manufacturers and such. There's even, and folks probably know this, there's a bus going between a manufacturer in Coburg and Brampton. every day down to 401 because they work there, and then they have to go home because there's no place to work. There's lots of stories in there. It's all in my report, so I'm just giving you the very quick Coles notes if you remember what Coles are. Anyway, some of you do, thank you. So many seniors, youth returning to the county, and I heard a lot. I did this by interviewing people, and I heard from people that kids couldn't come back from university, from college, and such. They couldn't find a home. So a lot of people were coming back to live with their family, which they really didn't like to do in their 20s and 30s. But that's where it was the safe place to go. And one of the things, this is the fourth point, the status quo isn't working right now if we're looking for the average person in Northumberland. There is no housing for them, and I'll get down to that as well. And it goes back to how do we want the county to grow? How do we want it to thrive? If we do, it needs housing that people at whatever income can afford. So key numbers, because everybody loves stats, right? And we can talk about this. All my stats are referenced, mostly from the census that was done in 2020, but was put out in 2021. By the way, if you sign up, you'll get my presentation. You'll also get the link to my report. We're also asking you to sign up because we don't want to be accused of spamming you. So it's spam legislation why we're getting you to sign up. So, key numbers. So I counted, and my husband will swear I counted a few too many times. About 5,000 housing units for both for-profit and non-profit are being in the process of the planning system as of spring of this year. Now, that's a lot in the process, and I compare it in Northumberland has been building a lot of units. The work is being done. The planning department's overwhelmed. But if you look at 5,000 units currently in the planning system, and when I say currently, that was March. But in 2021, there were 717 units built, and in 2022, there were 510. Now, we can talk about shortage of workers. We can talk about supply chain issues. There's a lot of items we can talk about. But it's a very ambitious number of applications going in. The planners are doing everything they can to put them through. But it's very ambitious. But when you actually look at what's being built, and I did, 85% of the houses being in the planning system are at market or above. And I did market, I had to benchmark it in January of this year, and it was 702. Now, it's gone up, down, and sideways, and a number of you are in real estate, and you will tell me that it's been a roller coaster. But that's the benchmark, and it's again, what's coming through the system and what is being new builds coming through. And one of the
these
things,
are people moving
again, I can
from
explain.
Toronto.
So how did I get
and
what was
never
market, what was attainable, what was affordable? I used I won't say the best, I'll say the only available information on what those definitions are. Market is market, and that's you get from the federal government, the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation. I always get acronyms wrong, I'm sorry, I'm dyslexic. But you get that number of what the market number is, even though you get the flyers from real estate folks telling you what it is. It's usually around there, but there's the federal number. But the province in November of 2022, in their Development Charges Act, said, we're going to define affordable, we're going to define attainable. They're still working on it, but they hinted about what it might be. And so what they said was attainable, and again, if you can go back and look at the DC Act of November 2022, they said attainable would be 81 to 90% of market. So again, I've given you the numbers of what that means for Northumberland. And for affordable, it's 31 to 80%. That's a pretty big spread. But again, you may find some houses in that category. And I counted. There was 9% were attainable and 6% were affordable. And I mentioned still waiting for the province to come up to say what affordable is, because one of the things, it has always been defined as 30% of household income. Now the province, when I say they, the province is now looking at taking these percentages and tying it somehow to 30% or the definition. Right now, in the usual lexicon, we're using 30% of household income for deeply affordable. So all the language is changing. So what used to be affordable is now moved to deeply affordable, in case you're wondering where that switches. So, more numbers. And if you don't remember anything else that I'm saying today, walk home with this information. And this is from StatsCan. The average housing costs between 2015 and 2020 increased by about 60% in that 5-year period. At the same time, the average total gross household income went up only by 6%.
Wow.
That's a tenfold change. So if you're looking at why, income goes like this, cost of housing goes like this, it's that gap. What your parents may have bought, my parents bought a house for $27,000 back in the 60s. You can't even, that's not even a down payment now. But that is, the number one issue is household income, housing costs, and there's lots of reasons of the why. My job was not to say all the why, though I certainly heard it. But that's one of the biggest issues, is incomes have stayed mostly stable while inflation's gone up, but housing has gone up for many good reasons. But that's one of the major problems. Now, what's the total before tax, which is gross, household income, is essentially $76,000. That's average income for Northumberland. This is again from StatsCan. That's a goodly amount of money. Most people would say that should get you where you want to go. And that's just the average household, let alone those who are below that number. So what does housing also look like? So 81% of the residents of Northumberland own homes, or they at least own it with the banks. I usually try and get a chuckle out of that one. Whereas only 19% are renters. There's not very much purpose-built rental in Northumberland, you know this, and most of it is secondary. And that gets you into a whole other number of issues. And in looking at all the plans coming through the system, only 1.3% of the new builds were purpose-built rentals. And you probably know where that is. I'll just leave that there. And compared to Ontario, Northumberland really does, it's basically 20% to 30%. And as well, the vacancy rate in 2021, because that's the document number I have, is less than 1%. And you know that there's numbers that come out all the time and rentals. I'll go to my next slide, which is the average market rental in Northumberland County is on par or sometimes higher than the GTA. Even though the federal government still puts our numbers with the more rural part of Eastern Ontario, most people in the GTA think we're part of the GTA. And as one very smart person said, we may, in this county, be solving the problem of the GTA, but we're not solving the problem for our own residents. So, one of the great shout out, and not just because I did it for them, the number of affordable or deeply deeply affordable housing units coming on stream has never been higher between Northumberland County and the Northumberland County Housing Corporation and Habitat for Humanity. There's never been so many units, and also the Ontario Aboriginal Housing Services. They're working together. They're building more non-profit housing units than they've ever been done. It's still about 2% of what's coming through the stream. The other thing, and I don't think there's developers in the room, but I have said this in front of developers, the average household in Northumberland County is 2.3 people. Don't know how they cut that third, but you know how.
It hurts.
But look at the houses that are being built. Think about the houses, if you're a little older, that you may have grown up in. They're a lot bigger, and if over 60% of the Northumberland community is either a single person in a house or two people in a house, what's being built is not really in sync. I think that's the politest way I can put it. There's a lot of house for fewer people, and there are some builders that are putting units inside, which they can either for family members or rent out. But unfortunately, those houses are retail over $1 million. Again, this is just facts, and it's in there. And so the current rental market, and again, I'm just telling you what you already know, is unaffordable for all low income, most moderate income folks, and that's where the average is, and even some high income households. They can't do $3,000 a month. Nobody can. Very few people. I don't know anybody who can. So going to my last slide, thematic summary. So not only did I do the numbers, I then interviewed a whole bunch of people to find out what they were saying. I've already said this. The labor market reports indicate need for new workers over the next years. There's a lot of growth in Northumberland, especially in the southern part. Again, they need workers, particularly general laborers, skilled labor, healthcare, and early years. We know that we have not enough people in our early years. We know we don't have enough healthcare professionals. They're not going to move here or graduate here without housing. They need it. And I know the county's doing some good work in this, and we look forward to further information about it. Seniors. And I know the mayor's in the room, so I'm going to be careful about this, but I did see somewhere that the town of Cobourg has the distinction of being one of the oldest towns in Ontario, 1 out of 5. Okay, I'm getting the nod. My number's right. We've got about 30% of the seniors in the county are over 65%. But we've got two problems on each side, and again, lots of interviews about this. We've got some people who are overhoused for various reasons. They're the only person in the house, and it's a big house, or they're precariously housed. They're a renter, and Patricia was talking about income pensions that don't keep up with inflation. It just takes one rent eviction, and they're in their car. And heard a lot of really sad stories as I was doing the interviews. But we've got this situation with our seniors that they want to stay in the community. They don't want to go to a retirement house. They don't want to go to long-term care, only when they need to. But where can they move that's smaller? That's one of their thoughts. And then I talked to everybody who provides social services in the county, and I will say they are stretched beyond belief. They all talk about being innovative, and they have to be. Provincial funding hasn't increased since 2018, and everything else has gone. But they are stretched, and they know they're not providing all the services they can. They're doing the best they can, but they're watching this get worse, and many of the comments were about the rent evictions, that those people that are precariously housed are just being pushed out. even further. And as I say to most folks I talk to, if you lost where you're living right now, be it home or rental, could you afford to come back into it? Most people say no, they couldn't afford a house at this point of the same value and such. But I will leave it there. I will be happy, I don't know where Neil is, right there. Happy to answer any questions if there's time before I introduce Rebecca. Thank you for the compliment, great information, fast. Now what do we do and fast? And I guess one of the things, what are the solutions? And I know there's lots of people working on solutions right now. One of the biggest issues that we're hearing about, and what I know Habitat's working on, and the county and everybody else, is increasing the diversity of our communities. There is opportunity. Again, this could be, and I always say this wrong, an auxiliary dwelling unit in your backyard for a rental or your family. There are different ways to do things, but everybody staying in their own swim lane isn't working right now. We need ways in the community to welcome back people who came from the community, welcome people who are working, but we need to find a way to fill in those middles, not just the market, the estate, call it workforce housing. It's filling in that middle, and we need more rental. And be that secondary in people's homes, and no, there's not a magic wand for the landlord-tenant board. I wish there was. I think everybody does. But we need to make it for both owners and rentals, that how do you work together? And I guess that's the thing. It's how do you want your community to be is the question. Oh, I've got another one. And then I think I'm probably going to get that.
Oh, I went over this way.
But I'll read the question. I recall that in the 50s, a house price could be measured by the number of years the single breadwinner gross salary would take to buy the home. Do you agree, always dangerous, do you agree that in today's world with two breadwinners per household, we enter a time when most mortgages will never be paid off because the growth of prices will always exceed the growth of wages? One of the reasons I like this report is it puts a spotlight on the fact that the average household, which could be two breadwinners, could be three, can't make the mortgage. I actually go through in the report, I put the average through two banks' mortgage rate, and they couldn't make it even though I maxed out on down payment and everything like that. I think, and even though I've worked in politics most of my life, I'm still hopeful. I think it's got a point, and there was a famous cabinet minister who said, don't let a good crisis go unwasted. There's a point where it's not just a few people that are experiencing this issue, it's virtually everybody. So I am very hopeful. We have to find ways to do it. When I hear about, I'm going to say it wrong, the time of the mortgages becoming infinity mortgages. Do you really want to leave that with your kids? Like, there's a point where you're getting to a brink that has to, every community I think is having the same discussion. Where do we want to go? And do we want the people that we depend on to work here, to shop here, and everything else? Don't we want them to have a place to live? Because everybody needs a place to live to be able to thrive. And I got the 2-minute thing. So even though it's not great, and we won't talk about bank profits right now, but something's got to give, and I think that's what we're seeing across our communities, across Ontario, and I know municipal leaders are more than aware of it. And the comment about the province controlling municipalities, yeah, there's 260 pieces of legislation they have to follow. Just a few bits of oversight. But it's, the community needs to decide how does it want to approach this. We now got the data. What are we going to do with it? So thank you very much.
Hi, the next person who will be talking is Rebecca Harmon, and she's going to be introduced by the previous speaker, Monica, and so I will just let her do her thing, and it's another really very valuable, interesting speaker. So please listen and listen carefully. Lots of interesting information about what's happening in Northumberland County and the rest of Ontario, all about housing.
And I will now introduce, I will leave the question for Rebecca, but Rebecca Carmen, who's the Associate Director, Housing and Homelessness, and the Northumberland County Housing Corporation's General Manager. She's speaking on a home for everyone. How do we get there together? If that's not a segue, I don't know what is.
Hi, everybody. As Monica said, I'm the Associate Director of Housing and Homelessness for Northumberland County and the General Manager of Northumberland County Housing Corporation. I have a presentation here today that I'll walk through. We also have left some handouts on the desk. Our apologies, we had printed them prior to the notification going paperless, so we shared them with you. There's some data and also an invitation to our grand opening of Elgin Park on Friday. Next slide, please, Dawn. So the paper that I'm presenting to you today was drafted by the Housing Strategic Services Committee's Municipal Support of Rental Development Technical Table, and I'll give a little bit more about that. I'm a co-chair of both of those organizations. And the point of this paper that we put together, we released it earlier this year, and the point of the paper was to provide a response to the Affordable Housing Task Force that seemed to be existing in every organization. Every group was talking about what we needed for affordable housing in our province. But what we found was that there was a limited recognition of the role service managers play in the development of housing, funding housing, and ensuring housing continues. So what we did was we got together and we provided our voice to this crisis. So what service managers are, really briefly, is housing, as we heard from our first speaker, was downloaded from the federal government to the provincial government, and in 2001, in Ontario alone, was downloaded to 47 service managers, and in Northumberland County, the County of Northumberland is that service manager. We also are the sole shareholders, the sole funders of local housing corporations, in this case, Northumberland County Housing Corporation, and in many communities across Ontario, local housing corporations are the lead drivers of growth in affordable and rental housing. We are system planners, so we are responsible for ensuring that we have homelessness and housing systems that meet the needs, that support folks. We receive provincial and federal funding, and we support agencies through service agreements and other ways. And we are accountable to both the province and local communities. When we look at what the Housing Strategic Steering Committee is, just very briefly, we are a group of housing leaders in our service manager jurisdictions, and we felt that we were not getting representation on housing-specific issues to the extent needed, and so we self-formed a committee, and we represent all 47 service managers. We advocate and discuss and consult with the provincial and federal governments. We advise organizations like the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, the Ontario Municipal Social Services Association, and we provide them with insight and input into what we need to support and improve housing systems across the province. We also created a technical table that I chaired where we had about 15 different service managers come in, and we worked on this paper together. You can find the paper on our website, and we'll make sure Don has it to send it out afterwards as well. And we surveyed our service managers to provide some input into the data. So it's a really great paper that explains the role of service managers and what is being done across Ontario. Next slide, please. So when we look at provincial housing numbers, what we can see is that across the province there are 47 service managers. We currently have more than $1.77 billion in local funding. So that's really important that the funding for these programs is coming from our local tax base. We manage more than 260,000 community and affordable housing units. We have more than $40 billion in combined asset. We support and fund more than 1,500 local nonprofits and cooperative housing providers. We house more than 680,000 Ontarians. But we all know more is needed. The housing crisis continues across the province. And we see that in every jurisdiction demonstrated by a lack of affordability, limited stock, and poor conditions of units. Here in Northumberland, our local context is we currently have over 1,000 households on a wait list for our renter-to-income housing. That has grown substantially over the last 10 years. In the last 10 years, it's grown by more than 300%. Last year alone, we added 319 households to our wait list. Again, and some of these stats are on the infographic that you have at your table as well. At any given time, we have approximately 75 folks who are unhoused in our community, and that is representative by the number of people on our by name list. So those are folks who have consented to be part of the by name list and work with agencies collaborating together to support finding housing solutions. So there may be folks that are not captured in that number. We have had 1% rental vacancy for years here in Northumberland County. We have 9% of our households would be considered low income. 18% of all residents pay over 30% of income in housing, so that's that affordable definition. 19% of our community rents versus own, as Monica indicated, and we had 11% of people are food insecure. This is some of the data from the newest census that I'm sharing. When we think about what service managers actually do to create housing, when we worked with our technical table, the way it was really described was that we are boots on the ground. We are actively addressing the housing crisis across the province through development efforts and or incentives to third-party developers. When a developer is looking to build housing in our community, they're often calling us to navigate what programs and supports might be available. Nearly half of our responding service managers have had to grow internal capacity and shift staffing roles to support rental housing development, and Northumberland is no different in that case. We have consistently, since at least 2014, been the primary funder of housing-specific programs across the province. And we had participating service managers submit various housing projects that they're working on, and so we received 48 different projects that service managers were working on, which represented about $820 million worth of capital investments. And what we found was service manager funded contributions represented 48% of all new development funding throughout those projects. We also recognize that in some of those projects, service manager contributions actually reached upwards of 80%. And we also recognize that in the vast majority of projects, about 85% of projects, service managers were funding those projects, yet only 44% of those same projects received provincial-only funding. So the service managers and local governments are contributing to the funding of housing. We also saw that the majority of service managers, about 75%, indicated that they were currently working on a new housing project. When we looked at the barriers and limitations for us in developing housing, the specific barriers that were often identified was the amount of funding made available by upper levels of government, followed by the required timelines of those funding costs, a lack of operating funding to support ongoing costs. So where there is funding, it's for capital construction, it's not for operating, programmatic challenges, and availability of land. In the service managers who responded, we had about 25 service managers respond. And from those 25 service managers, we found that there was a total of 6,638 affordable rental housing units in development between 2018 and 2022, with an additional 16,827 units that were planned or in progress over the next 3 years. So again, that just shows the work that's being taken across the province. So the next slide, Don. So this is a slide that we developed. Next couple of slides look at funding, the funding snapshot from a Northumberland perspective. So this slide looks at the capital project snapshot for Northumberland. This includes projects, the Elgin Park construction, our pre-construction budget for 473 Ontario Street, the acquisition of 123 King Street, Colborne, our capital grant program, and 152 Colborne is a supportive housing project. So this is what's in this snapshot. There's a lot more projects underway, but this is what we have kind of on the books. In this, you can see that the county is funding 55% of all capital funding that's been earmarked. The federal only funds is 37%, and I should note that a lot of those federal funding is required to be cost matched by the municipality. So we've had to demonstrate that we've also spent that amount of money in social housing development or in operations. Provincial only has funded 5%, and I should note that that is specifically for the 152 Colborne project. If we remove that project that we use one-time funding, it would be zero. And the town of Cobourg and other partner contributions for 473 represent 4%. So the town of Cobourg provided some incentives for Elgin Park, and we also factor in that both Ontario Aboriginal Housing Services and Habitat for Humanity Northumberland will be paying for their share of Ontario Street. So that's that other category. Again, just a quick slide from the infographic. That whole chart represents $23 million in capital contributions currently in the works. And we also have over $10 million in annual housing support that's being provided within Northumberland County. Next slide, please. And when we look at that $10 million, this is the breakdown for it. Sorry. So the 2023 operating budget for housing. This would include Northumberland County Housing Corporation, so its operations are nonprofit. So what we heard in the first speaker was that there was no new money that flows from the federal and provincial governments for subsidy, and the vast majority of that subsidy is paid for by county levy. So we continue to fund and maintain the affordability of those nonprofit housing providers and cooperatives. It also includes our rent supplement programs, our affordable housing programs. So the province does provide us with annual allocations that we invest locally in our Renovate Northumberland program, which is a partnership with Habitat, and capital repairs into our nonprofit and co-op and local housing corporation sector, our aging infrastructure. And also some admin. So in here you can see just under 75% of this is funded through the county levy. And then we have the second largest portion is through federal, and then we have provincial and cost shared as well in that diagram. So again, the county is funding the majority of it. When we look at what we're doing to increase our support in Northumberland, we provided in 2023 over 1,000 shelter housing benefits for folks who are homeless or at risk of becoming homeless. We kept 133 unique emergency shelter users safe over the years. So those are folks that accessed our various emergency shelter systems, like Transition House, like the warming room. We also have 119 warming room users. We invested in 2023, or we are investing in 2023, $2.3 million in our homelessness response, of which approximately $1.7 million goes specifically to our emergency shelter. So that's a very high-level overview of the homelessness budget. When we look about increasing housing stock, I asked that this picture of an iceberg be included. This is how I feel. This is my personal analogy of the housing of where we are. It's an iceberg. And what we do every day is we chip. We chip and we chip and we chip. And we are taking it down bit by bit, and it's making a difference. But it is still enormous that we're looking after. The other thing I like about this graphic is that there's also an under the water element to it, and so that you could look at that through the factors that maybe lead to the housing shortage and housing crisis, the complication of housing and what it all means. So that's that's a bit of a tangent, but that's why we've used the iceberg. The NCHC owns and manages 373 affordable housing units as of today, December maybe, and that number's grown. Last year it was 344. So we have added, in this year alone, we've added stock to our housing stock. 48 new affordable housing units in 2023. We are building 45 new housing units currently. There are 45 new units under development. That's phase 2 of Elephant Park and our Ontario Street project. And we are also pursuing actively with the county 5 new properties for growth. So we are not stopping at where we are. We are going and we are moving and we are growing. Next slide, Dawn. So I'm going back to now the paper. So these are recommendations that the paper recommended to the federal and provincial funding. The paper itself made 31 recommendations, and we broke these recommendations down into 3 areas. The first was funding, the second was program and process improvement, and our third was around education and awareness. So what we need from a funding perspective from upper levels of government. We need ongoing operational funding to support newly constructed housing. This is particularly true for supportive housing units. We know we need supportive housing units. We know we need transitional housing units, but supportive housing falls under the provincial jurisdiction, funded specifically by the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Community Social Services. We can build, we can operate, we can be a landlord, but we need those other funding sources to come to the table to help us ongoing operating and ensure people have the supports they need to be able to be successful in their housing journey. We need equitable access to all funding sources. So by this, we reference that there are certain funding sources that are earmarked to certain jurisdictions, certain cities, certain different pieces. And particularly from a rural, small environment, we sometimes find that if it's measured in a total number of people we're supporting, we may be supporting less than, let's say, a larger urban center. But percentage-wise and impact-wise, it is the same, if not more. And so we need to make sure that when we are advocating to upper levels of government, that it's not a zero-sum game in how we access and support and allocate funding. We are looking for both the federal and provincial governments to be active partners in all affordable housing initiatives. And by that, we mean a third. The service managers, municipal level should be paying a third. The provincial should be paying a third, and the federal government should be paying a third. You can see from our charts a few slides ago, that's not the case, and what we could do with that joint investment and partnership and funding and building these things. We also need to look at reevaluating the National Housing Strategy funding, decreasing our cost. What we've seen is these cost-shared programs that have been around for years have slowly been decreasing. What we've seen is that since 2016-2017, there's been an annual decrease. But it's not being talked about as an annual decrease because it's new funding every year. But it's less new funding every year. And we use this funding to support things like new rental construction. We use this funding to support our nonprofit and co-op and local housing corporation, which has, unfunded capital liabilities in, $50 million worth. Our local housing corporation stock is on average 49 years old, and we need to make massive investments. Our nonprofits are younger, but they are coming up there too, and they have needs, and we have very limited funding coming from other levels of government to support the repair and maintenance, let alone trying to build new housing as well. So in Northumberland, we looked at our allocations, and what we've seen that our allocation in 2022-2023, and I should just note that this does not include our homelessness prevention program, which did have an increase last year. This is specifically housing programs, decreased by 58% from our allocation that we received in 2016-2017. And if we remove the Canada-Ontario Community Housing Initiative funding, or COCHI, and the reason we might remove that from this allocation is that it's cost shared with the municipality and not with provincial funding. And that then jumps to 81%, that is decreased. So that's kind of some snapshots of the recommendations, what we need from a funding perspective. From a program and process improvement, we need multi-year allocation to be committed to in advance before fiscal year begins. I think this year we got our allocation August. Yeah, people are nodding, I can't remember. August. Well, the fiscal started in April for the provincial government. That's an entire construction season we've missed. And that's challenging when we have to commit and spend the money by the time their fiscal year ends. We are advocating for a consideration of interest-free loans for local housing corporations, municipalities, large housing providers who commit to multiple developments of affordable housing. The impact of increasing interest rates has really challenged the development of affordable housing. That's really made our projects harder to fund and will limit the amount of housing we're able to build. We need our shelter rates for social assistance to go up. People cannot afford to live on what they are getting on Ontario Works, Ontario Disability Support Program. And from a housing perspective, a public and community housing perspective, we need the rent scales and utility scales to be reconsidered. And so what a rent scale is that if an individual on Ontario Works lives in social housing, the social housing landlord only gets about $85 of their shelter portion, but they're entitled to just around $400, a little bit less. If they were in a private market, they'd be able to put all of that money to their rental. They don't get to keep that money if they're in social housing. The province keeps that money. So municipalities are subsidizing social assistance at the provincial level, and we need it to stop. That's kind of dirty. We can use that money for better purposes.
I know the $400 housing allowance. I always thought it went to the.
We also need to unlock access to provincially owned surplus lands. We need to have access to lands that are shovel ready that we can build on. We need access to land. Land is the first step to begin to develop.
Land is easy.
We also need to reconsider the impact of these funding programs requiring shovel-ready projects. If we knew we had money coming down, it might help us take on some new projects, and it might help us move forward. It really puts us in a competing position against each other. We always, as service managers, want to say, one should not benefit at someone else's loss. So if we could have some more equitable access to those things, we would be better off. We also are advocating for a trilateral housing table with service manager representation. And so what that means is that the provincial and federal governments talk about housing or other programs, but we're the main funders, so we should be there too. We should have a voice. We should be engaged and consulted, and we should be a part of those tables, particularly in Ontario. Next slide. From an education and awareness role, we had some recommendations here. And one of the recommendations was acknowledge the role in funding service managers and municipalities in funding announcements. What we find is announcements that say things like the provincial and federal government have created 40 new units at Elgin Park. But we are the main funder, and we're not mentioned, and we're not referenced. So again, there's a lack of public understanding of how housing is funded and built and supported in our communities, and we need people to understand that. That helps. We need to do massive training and succession planning for the housing sector. Housing is complicated. It is very specific, and it goes back generations, where that information is still relevant today. The negotiations that they had and agreements they settled in the 40s and the 60s are still part of my daily work. And what's going to happen as more and more people retire from municipalities, from the province, from the federal government, we need some succession planning in place. And again, more early and meaningful consultations with service managers. So we also considered about what we can do next. So the things that we looked at doing, some of our next steps were to continue to tell our story and advocate. We have to get out there. We have to tell our story. We need to continue to advocate to those levels of government. From Northumberland County's perspective, in advocacy, we work on our Housing Strategic Steering Committee. We sit on policy advisory committees of the Ontario Municipal Social Services Association. We sit on advisory committees for Housing Services Corporation. We work on local dialogue and networking. We're part of the Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus and their 7 and 7 housing plan. And we're there in AMO and Roma, and we're there continuing to advocate on our story. We also know we need to seek active partnerships in the development of affordable housing. We cannot do this alone. And so a really great example of that is our 473 Ontario Street project, which is a partnership with Ontario Aboriginal Housing Services, the NCHC, the county, and Habitat for Humanity Northumberland, where we are co-designing, co-financing, and co-owning 62 units of housing that's based in reconciliation. And so those are the types of projects we need to keep bringing forward. We are all bringing our own expertise, our own equity to the game, and our own funding sources. Next slide. So this is just something that I will leave you with before I show you a video. So conclusion might be a bit of a misleading title. This is a quote from our paper. Without concerted and collaborative efforts, service managers will continue to address what we can through local development, levy-funded incentives, and limited government funding allocations. However, our ability to have the impact needed and to truly meet housing needs across the province will depend on collaborations that include all orders of government, as well as partners from both the nonprofit and private sector. What we're saying here is that we're not going anywhere. We're going to keep building, we're going to keep growing, but we need those partnerships.
As I listen to this again in putting this all together for presentation for the radio show here on Trent Radio 92.7, and this is Stephen Haylestrom from Let's Talk Housing. And as I put it all together again, I am reminded again about how many dedicated people there are to all of this. And at the end of all of this presentation, one of the things that was discussed was how when a new development is put in that specifically, or often when a new development that is presented that is affordable or for underhoused or transitional, that there ends up being a fair bit of disruption caused by local people based on NIMBYism, or not in my backyard, or just the fact that they feel that it will, often it's quoted, it will lower the property values, or any of these combination of different things always seem to be an issue. And so in the next part, next week, I will play Rebecca Again Presents a Movie. Again, you won't be able to see the movie, but really it's the words that count. And I'll play that first next week for you to hear that movie that she presented. And again, I'll try and put a link to that video as well. And it really is moving to hear how good housing can change people's lives. Well, that's it again for another week. Next week we'll have one more episode of this with information from the Northumberland Housing Association presentation. And really, I thank everyone for listening. This is Stephen Haylestrom from 92.7 FM Trent Radio, and also on a podcast, Let's Talk Housing with Stephen Haylestrom. Thank you very much for being here. Have a great day and a great week.